Minister Naftali Bennett and Mossad Chief David Barnea, as well as President Isaac Herzog and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. Talks will likely focus on Iran, not just the U.S. efforts to revive the nuclear deal, but also Tehran's regional activity, including the recent attack against an Israeli-owned tanker off the coast of Oman. Israel will also be looking to gain insights regarding the Biden administration's stance towards new Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi. Burns will later visit Ramallah for a series of meetings with officials from the Palestinian Authority. And for more on this, we're joined by our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev. So, Jonathan, first of all, obviously Iran is going to be at the top of the agenda, but what exactly regarding Iran do you think is the most important thing for Israel? Because there's a lot going on here, the nuclear deal, a new administration, and of course, that attack against the ship that occurred off the coast of Oman.
Yes, Iran is all over the place. In some areas, Jerusalem and Washington, they see eye to eye, but not all of them. Mainly the nuclear issue. We've heard comments coming from Defense Minister Benny Gantz saying that, yes, Israel is ready for an attack in Iran, something that at least for the moment the Americans do not want. They want to engage in negotiations. Even with the new president, with the hardliner Ebrahim Raisi, the Biden administration wants first to engage in negotiations, hoping to reach a new deal. And I'm quite sure they're not very happy with the Israeli rhetoric regarding a possible attack. That is one issue. Second, of course, Iran's regional influence, let's call it this way. And on this issue, Israel and the United States see much more eye to eye. Both countries are concerned with what seems to be Iranian actions against maritime targets, especially in the Persian Gulf, especially around the Strait of Hormuz. Western ships and Israeli-owned ships are targeted there, and that is a concern. And a third issue is, of course, Iranian influence much closer to the Israeli border, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Lebanon. Let's remember, it was only on Friday, 4 days ago, when we saw rocket attacks from Lebanon into Israel by Hezbollah. Hezbollah taking explicit responsibility this time. They're well coordinated with the Iranians. So the issue is now how to respond. What can Israel do about this? But over everything hovers the main difference between the two sides, the nuclear deal. Iran still, the United States still wants to engage in negotiations with Iran, something that Israel is worried about. Israel is worried about a return to a nuclear deal that will not be harsh enough, that will allow the Iranians, under this umbrella of a deal, to get closer to a nuclear weapon, and in some sort of a strange way. Maybe for Israel it is good to have Ebrahim Raisi as the president of Iran, a hardliner such as Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Remember him? Right. They put that tough rhetoric loud and clear, whereas former President Hassan Rouhani, and especially his foreign minister Javad Zarif, they looked as if they were much more approaching to the West. The new president in Iran will probably not do the same.
Right, certainly it looks like it's going to be harder to reach a deal with Ebrahim Raisi for the Americans. But just also briefly, if you can touch on the visit of Burns to the West Bank, also meeting with Palestinian officials there.
A very interesting issue. Let's remember just 6 months ago, the Palestinians would not meet any American officials. Of course, we're speaking of the Trump administration back then, due to the deal of the century and the move of the American embassy to Jerusalem. Under the new administration, obviously there's some kind of a rapprochement between Washington and Ramallah. Where will it lead? We do not know, but we do know that they're somewhat getting closer, especially when compared with the relations between the United States and the Palestinian Authority under the Trump administration. All right.